So anytime I post anything about climate change, I always get a lot of engagement from vegans. And I want to thank vegans for the engagement. Most people don't engage with those posts at all. They do terribly. I think a lot of people, anytime they hear about climate change, they just get like deer in the headlights and don't even know how to interact with that post at all, or don't even watch it. And I also want to thank vegans for your principled food choices. I'm in complete agreement that animal agriculture is one of the main driving forces of climate change. I've been what I call an aspiring vegan for nigh on 15 years. I try to eat plant-based and feed my family a plant-based diet as much as I can, but I don't always succeed. But I want to invite all y'all vegans in my comments to shift from a vegan activism that's really focused on individual choices and personal responsibility towards a system level activism. Because we've had 50 years of environmentalism focused on individual people's choices and behaviors. And clearly, it's not freaking enough. It's not gonna work. This post is entirely focused on individual consumer choices. The final words are reduce your carbon footprint. But I hope that we all know, or if we don't, we should know by now, that oil companies, fossil fuel companies, created and pushed the idea of a carbon footprint, created and put out the carbon footprint calculator so that people would blame themselves for climate change instead of the people in the systems most responsible. And it's not that different. Like, I just made a post about climate change in general. And the response of a lot of commenters on Instagram who were vegans was to come in and say, well, everyone just needs to be vegan. Individual choices, done. That's my contribution to the discourse on climate change. And you also have the anti-natalists coming in and say, just don't have kids. Everybody, don't have kids. That's my contribution, done. But those strategies are not that different from saying the solution to climate change is just people stop driving cars. People stop littering. So what a systems level kind of vegan activism would look like is focusing on the systems and the politics and the big money that make eating a plant-based diet very, very difficult. And yes, it is very, very difficult. Anyone who's telling you it's not, I'm sorry, you must have a lot of privilege or you live in a certain portion of the world where it is easy to you, but it's not easy for everybody. I went to Oakland in the spring, and oh my goodness, in Oakland, California, I was like, oh, I get it now. It is easy to be vegan here. Every single restaurant we went into had vegan options. Corner stores had like vegan options. Unfortunately, it would be totally financially inaccessible for me to live in Oakland. Here in Texas, if you are coming off a shift and you are exhausted and you pick up your kids from aftercare at their school and they're exhausted and everyone's hungry and your bodies are screaming for fat and proteins and salt and carbohydrates, and you can either spend the same amount of money to get fast food, animal product fast food that's going to fill everybody up, be delicious, make everybody happy, or use the same amount of money to go home and cook from scratch, or even not even the same amount of money, for more money, go home and cook from scratch a vegan meal that would be equally filling and nutritious and have an equal amount of protein and fats and everything. As long as those two choices are the same, the time it takes to do the cooking is going to make one financially inaccessible. The time it takes to drive to grocery stores that have decent produce and, plant-based protein options like tofu and things like that, you got to drive across the city for that. Where I live in a 5-mile radius of my house, if I want quick fast food to feed my kids, the only vegan option is French fries. That's it. So if you're a busy, stressed, working, single parent, trying to feed your kids, trying to just survive, it's really, really hard to be vegan. Why is that? What are the systems that make that true? Because vegetables and beans and produce should be environmentally way less expensive than meat. It just, in terms of resources, it takes so much less to grow a bell pepper as it does to grow a pound of ground beef. But why is it more expensive to buy a pound of bell peppers than it is to buy a pound of ground beef? It's because of ag subsidies. And I would just love for the vegans in my comments engaging in discourse on climate change to bring as much energy to the topic of ag subsidies as they bring to like shaming people for not being vegan or saying that it's just easy and everyone just needs to be vegan and making it all about individual choices, carbon footprints. Let's bring that energy to shaming the government, the politics, and the corporations that have turned our food pricing system upside down. So the global market spends $700 billion on agricultural subsidies. So this is when governments pay farmers to make the food artificially cheaper for consumers. And 63% of those subsidies go towards the meat and dairy industry, and 0.04% goes towards fruits and vegetables. And of the like 37% in between, some of that's going to like cotton. A lot of it is going towards corn and soy, which are also indirectly subsidizing the meat and dairy industry. So we are actually paying a shit ton for meat in the grocery store. We're just paying it in taxes that we give to the government, which gives it to meat and dairy industry to make those animal products artificially way cheaper than they should be. And bell peppers are freaking $3.50 a pop because there's absolutely no money in it for farmers. There's no incentive to grow fruits or vegetables. On top of direct agricultural subsidies, you have water subsidies. So water subsidies, so again, government's paying farmers to make prices artificially cheaper, total $320 billion. And because of these water subsidies, we have things happening like growing water intensive products like almonds in drought regions. And then there are the indirect subsidies in the forms of environmental harms and healthcare costs associated with this meat and dairy diet to the tune of $414 billion. So consumers are paying more for their healthcare because they're eating this unhealthy, too much meat and dairy diet. And the solution is to flip what we're subsidizing and not by very much, and people will start eating a plant-based diet. A 2017 study showed that if we could adjust subsidies to drop the price of produce by just 10%, people would start eating more plant-based, and it could save up to 160,000 deaths by cardiovascular disease alone. If tofu was $1 for a brick and you could get 5 bell peppers for $1, but then a pound of ground beef was like $40-50, that would accurately reflect the actual costs that we are paying for our various groceries, and people would naturally automatically start following a more plant-based diet. So a systems level vegan activism, sure, educate people about the importance of eating plant-based, about the cost of animal agriculture, educate them on how to feed themselves if they can nutritionally from a vegan standpoint, but bring just as much energy to criticizing these systems that keep us hooked on an animal agriculture based diet. And I know that's harder, actually. It's harder because it involves joining together, right? I would rather, as an environmental activist, you eat a burger and then go meet with at least one other person about how you're going to help people have access to plant-based foods more in your community, than that you yourself are a perfect vegan, but you're not partnering with anyone. You're not in community with anyone trying to overthrow any kind of system. Just being vegan by yourself and feeling like I have moral superiority now, I am making the correct choices and everyone else is not, that is not going to overturn these systems. If you're not in community with other people organizing something to disrupt those systems, to make plant-based food more accessible in your community, or, to fight against these agricultural systems or fight against the existing political order that has put these agricultural systems in place, we're not going to fix things in time. And I think that if any time someone opens their mouth to speak about climate change, a bunch of people ask them a litmus test first of, well, are you vegan? We're never going to build the mass movement that we need. So this channel is a safe space to be a climate activist and care about climate without being a perfect vegan. Finally, pre-order my book, which is called This. It's coming out with Interlink Press, the only watermelon-owned publishing company in the US this spring. Links are, you know where to find them.